Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for the Camunda Product Overview webinar. My name is Daya. I am the Content Marketing Manager here at Camunda and also your moderator for today. Before we get started and I pass the mic over to Ryan, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items with you. First and foremost, this webinar will be recorded and we'll send you the recording tomorrow so you have a chance to look at it in your own time. And secondly, the purpose of these webinars is actually to give you guys a chance to ask us questions. So we really encourage you to ask us questions, and there should be a questions bar or text box on your screen, and you can just type in your questions there, and we will answer any questions you have at the end of this webinar. With that being said, happy to introduce my colleague Ryan Johnson, who is the Director of Operations at Camunda Inc. And Ryan, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Daya, and thank you to all of you for joining us today for our webinar. As Daya mentioned, I am the Director of Operations for Camunda Incorporated, our North American division, and that means that my team is responsible for consulting and technical sales in this region. As this is a general overview, we're going to cover a lot of ground at a fairly high level today. We'd certainly be happy to go into more detail with any one of you if desired. And to that end, we'll post some contact information on how you can reach us at the tail end of this session during the Q&A portion of the agenda. So here is our agenda. We're going to start with an overview of Camunda, and then we'll do an overview of the product, a description of the product with some slideware to introduce you to the product before I go into a live demonstration. And once I've finished that live demonstration, then I'll transition into a short overview of the flexibility of our platform, which is one of our key calling cards. And then obviously we'll do Q&A. I'll hand it over to Daya for that, who will run the Q&A session and make sure that your questions get answered. So let's talk about Camunda. So we are an open source software vendor, and our focus is on workflow and decision automation. We are 9 years old, and our headquarters is in Berlin, which is where Daya is based. I'm in Denver, one of our 2 North American offices. The other office is in San Francisco. We now have over 140 customers in 18 countries worldwide, and we're growing very rapidly. We had 82% top-line growth last year, and we should come very close to matching that, if not beating it, this year. We do have more than 70 employees worldwide. I don't know the exact count right now because we're hiring all the time, but we are growing, and one of the key focus areas of that growth, obviously, is to serve our customers appropriately, and of course, to build the best product that we can build. So this is our case studies sample. We have a lot of case studies and a lot of white papers that are available on our website. If you follow that link, very simply, camunda.com/case-studies, you'll have access to all of these studies as well as a host of additional studies. And the bottom line is I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face and tell you what our platform can do, but the best way to get an understanding of what you can get from using Camunda, the benefits that you can realize through the use of our platform, is to look at these white papers, to look at these case studies and see what other customers have done with our product. So now let's talk about the products just for a few moments. You'll see this particular image on our website if you go to camunda.com. It's a nice high-level overview of the set of products that comprise the Camunda BPM product. And together, these products give you a full lifecycle platform for design within Camunda Modeler, all the way to implementation and reporting in Camunda Cockpit and Camunda Optimize. And all of these tools run on top of our workflow and decision engine. They're captured as separate engines here. They're actually one engine to give you the capability, obviously, to run your business processes, to run your workflows and your decisions within your enterprise. I am going to talk about these individual products in a little bit more detail here in a couple of slides where I get into just a little bit more of a technical overview of the platform. So I'm not going to cover each one in depth right now. So I talked about that engine in the last slide. That is the core of the Camunda product. That engine executes workflows or business processes as well as decisions. It is a very lightweight engine that is written in Java. Lightweight is very important for some of our customers who embed the product within an existing Java application. It is just like any of the libraries that you might use from Apache or other vendors, and it would give you the capability to have workflow and decision automation within your existing application if you chose to use it that way. It does have a full Java API and REST API, and I'll probably mention this again here in just a minute, but if you see anything that can be done within Tasklist and Cockpit, that can also be done through the REST API, through the public REST API, which of course means that you can use your applications to interact with the engine in the same way that we use Tasklist and Cockpit to interact with our engine. And it's part of our openness. Being an open source company, we're very open and flexible. We make sure that what we use to build our client applications is what you can use to build your client applications. The engine does run on top of the popular JVMs. It runs on top of all of the common relational database systems. And it is what I call cluster easy. And I say cluster easy because we don't store state at the application level. The state is stored either at the relational database or the relational database cluster level. And that, of course, means that in order to cluster Camunda, all you have to do is stand up a new instance, download it from Camunda.com, stand up a new instance, point it to the same database or database cluster, and you immediately have a Camunda cluster. Of course, you can tweak some of the settings if you'd like, but it runs right out of the box like that as a cluster. So this is the more technical diagram, and slightly more technical diagram that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And what I'd like to do is take the middle section that says Camunda BPM and talk about that to start with. And we'll go bottom up. So the database icon that you see in the bottom center of your screen is meant to depict a relational database. It could be PostgreSQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, etc. On top of that relational database or relational database cluster is our engine, which is depicted here in an image of an internal combustion engine, showing the three standards that we support. On top of that engine, which I talked about just a moment ago, are the applications that you were very briefly introduced to a couple of slides ago. Cockpit uses our built-in REST API, our public REST API, to provide dashboarding functionality so that you can see what's happening within Camunda BPM, and also to provide you with very detailed information on the process instances or the workflows and the decisions that are running within your environment, or those workflows or decisions that have historically run within your environment. It's meant for mostly technical operators, but it has a lot of useful functionality for business operators as well. And of course, the reporting information that is within Cockpit uses the same workflow models that you build in a visual manner so that it's easy for non-technical users to understand what is going on at a glance. Moving to the left, there are a couple of options for the presentation of tasks. And of course, this is a workflow engine. So tasks are important, or human tasks are important. We have a product called Tasklist that allows you to view, navigate, and complete your individual user tasks. And I'll show you that application here in just a moment. But many of our customers choose to use their own custom application for this. And this is for many different reasons. The primary reason that I've heard from our customers is that they have their own user interface standards. They have their own look and feel. Some call it a corporate look and feel within their organization. And we make our platform such that it's very, very easy to use your own application, your own user interface to work with Camunda. It's part of the flexibility and openness of the platform. Moving to the left, Modeler is depicted there. Modeler is your design time component that allows you to build process models. Now, some of our customers use Modeler for business analysts. So in other words, business analysts can use Modeler to build the business process models or workflows. And then those models can go to the developers for further development of those workflow models. That further development happens within the same tool, within Modeler. And those developers would simply make use of the properties panel within Modeler. You'll see that here in just a moment. So let me talk about the items that are sort of in the wings. Cawemo on the left-hand side is our tool that is designed primarily for business analysts or business users to create their workflows. Not only to create their workflows, but to collaborate on the creation of those workflows. So, if Daya and I were in two different places and we wanted to work together on the build-out of a process model, we could both open up our browsers, and any changes that Daya made would be visible in my browser immediately. And if, for whatever reason, we were working at different hours, which usually happens since she's in Berlin and I'm in Denver, I could add comments within Cawemo that she could see when she opened up the process model and wanted to make modifications to it. And I'll show it to you in just a moment, but it is designed for just the collaborative authoring of those models. On the right side, Optimize is a reporting tool that focuses on the reporting of information through the same visual representations of the workflows that you work so hard to build in Modeler. Now, why would you report on information using just flat text when you've worked so hard to build out those process models? So Optimize shows you that information in that format, and I'll show that to you here in a short while. Just one more note from a technical perspective is that when Optimize gets its data, it puts that data into Elasticsearch. That's important because Elasticsearch is optimized for long-term storage of data, or in other words, the storage of large data sets, whereas a relational database is typically not quite as good at handling very large data sets. What this means is you could have years and years of reporting data in Elasticsearch for use within Optimize, and only maybe 3 to 6 months of information within your relational database, such that you can keep that relational database running at a high level of efficiency. Okay, so now that we've covered this, I'd like to move on. I'll talk briefly about the architectural options, and then we'll get into the live demonstration. I mentioned the embedded model just a moment ago. The idea is that many customers have existing Java applications where they simply want to add workflow capabilities and decisioning capabilities, and you can do that simply by embedding the libraries within your existing Java application. The other two ways to use Camunda are to use a shared process engine or a container-managed process engine or a standalone process engine. These are both within application servers. If you use the shared or container-managed approach, you are able to share your process engine or your set of process engines across the applications or the WAR files that you have deployed on top of your application server. There are several advantages to that, and those of you who use application servers are probably thinking about what those advantages might be. But you also have the option to package everything up into a single WAR file that you can deploy on top of your application server. This is often used by our customers that use Docker or other solutions like that for micro containers and fast deployment. And it's a fantastic option in those circumstances. Okay, so let's see Camunda in action. The first thing I want to do is to show you the process model that I'm going to be executing today. And this is our standard Camunda invoice model. Actually, let me make this a little bit larger for you. Zoom in just a touch. So this is sort of the standard process model that we show when we're doing generic demonstrations. This is a modification of it, however. I've added some functionality so that I can talk to some of the advanced functionality if the opportunity presents itself. Now, let me just walk through this briefly, and then I'll execute it. And then, as we go through the demonstration, I'll show you some additional details. So this is specifically designed for the processing of invoices that are presented to a company. We could be a consumer of products, could be software products, they could be real products, like tangible products, or they could be services, whatever the case might be. Either way, we're going to get invoices for those products or services. And when we get those invoices, we have to be able to pay those invoices. And we pay those invoices using many different ways. In this case, we're going to pay it using commercial paper, which are essentially short-term loans that large corporations can get. So step one is for the invoice to come into the organization. We're going to persist that invoice. In this case, we're going to use the Java Persistence API, which for some of you, you're probably thinking, this is great, I can use JPA with Camunda. For others, you're thinking, I have no idea what that is. That's fine. All we're doing here is persisting this information to a database. And the important point is that you can use Camunda very easily to persist that information to any database or data store that you need. Again, we're an open platform. We work very hard on making it easy for you to integrate to your own systems. Once we've stored that for posterity, we're going to use a business rule task to execute a DMN decision table to determine who our approver groups are going to be. And this is a simple set of rules. There are 3 rules in here that take into account the amount of the invoice and the category of the invoice. And based on that information, we're making a determination on one or more groups that will be able to see and potentially approve the following task. Once we've done that, then we can make this approve invoice user task available to those groups for approval or to not approve. If the invoice is approved, we're going to go down our quote-unquote happy path. We're going to execute another decision table to determine the commercial paper rate. Once we have determined the commercial paper rate, we're going to notify our commercial paper dealer to sell the paper, prepare the dealer transfer, and then archive the invoice. I've zoomed in enough so that it's hard to see the end of it, so I'll move over to the right. If we don't go happy path and the invoice is not approved, we have a sub-process that is being called to review the invoice, and that sub-process is quite simple. But once we have determined who needs to review the invoice, maybe an additional person needs to review it, then we'll go back to our happy path. So let me pull up Tasklist, and I'm going to log in to Tasklist. This is the Tasklist product that you would see if you have the Enterprise Edition version of Camunda. It also happens to be the Tasklist that you would see if you have the Community Edition version of Camunda. And why is that? It's because Tasklist is not different between those 2 tools. Cockpit is different, and I'm going to show you some of the functionality within Cockpit as I go through this demonstration. And Optimize is also not a portion of the Camunda Community Edition product. Without further ado, let's start an instance of this process definition. So one of the things we have on this form is the ability to upload a file. We can store files within Camunda. We are not a content management system, so we don't have a lot of functionality in this area, and those clients that want to have content management connected to their workflow and decision automation solution get a recommendation from us to use a different tool along with Camunda. However, we certainly can store those files, and you can display those files within your tasks if you want to do so. I'll start an instance of this process, and now that I've started an instance, I can go to this All Tasks filter, and I'll see our task. Now, let me click on this task and then pause for a moment, because what I want to do is I want to describe what you're seeing within Tasklist very briefly. On the left-hand side, this is a set of filters. You can set up custom filters to get the views of the task that you specifically are interested in. Now, this is not a very good example of a production system because I have a grand total of 1 task in here. Obviously, in a production system, you would have a host of tasks, and thus filters make a lot of sense because you may have certain tasks that are higher priority than others, or you may want to work tasks in logical groupings, right? So once you've chosen your filter, the list of tasks appears in the center pane. Now, something that's important to note is these variables that you see at the bottom are actually variables that are set up by the filter. So when you set up the filter, you can determine which variables should show up in these tasks to kind of give you a quick view of what's going on within the tasks. Once I click on my task, then I have the task detail window over here to the right, or pane over here on the right. And this has a host of information. Just a sampling of that information is the set of groups that have visibility to this task. Now, these are the groups that can see it and claim it. We also have the ability to either claim it or see who has claimed the task already, right? Now, you typically wouldn't see that unless you were an administrator, where you had visibility to all of the tasks within the system. In this case, I am a user that is in one of these groups. I also happen to be the administrator. But imagine that I'm a member of one of these groups right now. Thus, I have the ability to claim the task. I'm going to click Claim. But before I actually complete it, I'm going to show you the history, which shows that I have claimed this particular task with my username, Ryan. And I'm going to show you the Diagram tab, which shows me sort of a map of where I am. And this is the exact same process model that you saw in Camunda Modeler just a moment ago. So without further ado, let me approve this task and let me complete it. And when I complete it, since we're going down the happy path, the next task is this Prepare Dealer Transfer task. And here I have to claim it again. I can review the information. All of these fields are read-only in this case, and I can complete that task. Once I complete that task, that actually finishes the process instance. And now I'm going to open up a Cockpit so that you can see, number one, you can see the details about Cockpit, and so that we can also see the process instance that has just been completed. So first step, this is the dashboard within Cockpit. And this, just like Tasklist, is customizable through plugin points. So you have the ability to make changes to Cockpit and to Tasklist in such a way that won't be an issue when you upgrade to a future product, as long as you observe these particular plugin points that exist within these tools. And just as an example, there's a plugin point for Cockpit right here so that you can add additional links at the top. And there's a plugin point for Cockpit down here at the bottom so you can add additional items within this particular dashboard. Now, the default dashboard has a couple of these little charts that show the number of running process instances or workflow instances, the number of incidents within the system. These are errors that have been generated asynchronously within the tool, and then open human tasks, tasks that users need to complete. We have some high-level charts here showing some information about what is going on within the system, and we also have deployment statistics over here on the right. Now, let's go in and look at the Camunda Invoice main process, and let's look at what you see when you pull that up within Cockpit. I'll make this slightly larger. It's the same process model, so you don't really need to digest the information, but just so that you can see that that same information is available right here within Cockpit. So it gives you a strong visual cue of what you're looking at. I'm going to go to History, and within History you're going to see a set of process instances, including the one that we just completed. If I click on this process instance, you're going to see these little gray tokens that tell you within this process instance how many of each one of these instances has been completed. And you can also see an audit log down here at the bottom that shows you all of those activities. You can view the variables within this particular process instance, and you can view a host of additional information. Here we have some decision instances that have been executed, and if I click on one of these IDs, you'll be able to see exactly which of the rows within this decision table fired. So now you can see in blue that this first row fired, and that gave us our commercial paper rate and our commercial paper maturation. Right? Now, one thing to note since we've transitioned over here to decisions briefly, is that if I click on the decision itself, within Cockpit, I do have the ability to edit it. Now, you can make a modification here. When you click Proceed, it's going to tell you that you're playing with fire. You could be making a change to a decision table in production, which is not necessarily advisable. However, it may be necessary in certain circumstances. So again, we have a flexible platform, and we want to give you the ability to do that if you need to do that. And there are a host of other things that you can do within the product that give you that ability to manage your Camunda instance or instances at a very low level, such as deleting process instances in batch, canceling those instances in batch, whatever the case might be. Okay, so we've seen this, the history. And by the way, this history functionality is only available within the Enterprise Edition of Cockpit. Within the Community Edition, all you see is the Runtime View. All right, let me show you a couple of other things before I move on from Cockpit. There's no way I can show you all of the functionality in Cockpit in this short amount of time, and Dia would be somewhat upset with me if I got a little bit too long-winded. So I certainly want to keep this brief. Now, a new feature that we added in the 7.8 version of Camunda is the ability to deploy directly here from within Cockpit. It's very easy. All you have to do is give the deployment a name and choose the files that you want to deploy. And then the rest of your deployments, or all of your deployments, will appear right here. We do have batch operations that you can execute within Camunda. So there's, and the great thing about batch operations is instead of trying to do something synchronously, it will handle the batch operations sort of offline, which allows you to handle very large batches of operations efficiently within the tool. And some of the examples of operations that you can perform: delete running or finished process instances, suspend those instances, or activate those previously suspended instances. Just some examples. One final thing to show you within Cockpit, and I apologize for jumping around just a touch. Within an instance, you can actually migrate that instance. So you can take, and right now I only have one version of this process model, but if I had two versions of this process model, say I deployed a version in production and 2 weeks later I'd realized that there was a problem, but I had, say, 50 instances running of that process model. I deployed the new version. Within most of our competitors' products, you're stuck. You sort of have to wait for those instances to complete, and then the new instances can run on the new version. Not the case with Camunda. Within Camunda, you create mappings from one step to another using lines. So I can remove this mapping, and I can move this mapping over here, right? So I can map it however I need to. And what this does is it says, if my instance is on version 1, and just pretend it's version 2 on the right for right now, if my instances on number 1 are at this wait state, I want to move it over to this wait state when it's migrated over to the new version of the process model. It gives you a lot of granular control over your migration, and it keeps you from being stuck if you've made a mistake on a process definition where you have several instances of that definition running. Okay, let me briefly show you Cawemo. And I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to show you the functionality within the tool. It may have logged me out. We're going to find out. So if I go, did not log me out, that's good. So in Cawemo, once I'm logged in, I can see my teams, I can see my projects, I can see my diagrams. So it gives you the ability to organize diagrams into different teams, so that if you're working on different projects or different initiatives from a BPMN standpoint, you can view different groups of diagrams. There are a bunch of other features within Cawemo that I would encourage you to explore. For today, what I want to focus on is what you see when you open up a process model and look to diagram that process model. So for ease of visibility, I have opened up 2 different browsers so that within this browser, You see this is the same interface. Within this browser, if I make a change to the diagram, you're actually going to see that change in real time. So we'll do it again. If I move this guy, it'll move that guy over here. So this is a simulation of what would happen if you have two people working on the same diagram. Seems like a really simple feature, but it's really useful. Again, if you're on the phone with somebody that's working in a different location, to be able to make those changes and see those changes in real time and collaboratively work on it, because both people can make those changes, is a really powerful feature in a teaming type of environment. Now, you also have the ability to add comments. You can add comments for individual steps. You can add comments for the diagram as a whole, whatever the case might be. Okay. You also can invite other collaborators to your diagrams. If you think, oh, John over in New York needs to give me some input, maybe in terms of how I'm determining my commercial paper rate, you can do that. You can invite John to participate. Just a couple of other things briefly to show you on Cawemo. So we do have the ability to embed the diagram into another page. Like for example, say you have Confluence in your organization, you want to be able to see this diagram there within Confluence, you have the ability to do that. So it can integrate, again, with the flexibility, again, with the openness of the company. We want you to be able to view that information in other systems and not be limited to just see that information within the Camunda ecosystem. Once you have completed the diagram, of course, you can export it as BPMN 2.0 XML, which will allow you to then use that diagram, not just in Camunda Modeler, but within any BPMN 2.0 compliant tool, right? So again, you're not stuck within the Camunda ecosystem. Once you have started to do some work in Camunda, you do have the openness and the ability to bring in other tools as necessary. We don't try to trap you. So that's Cawemo. And again, high-level overview, just like a high-level overview of Cockpit. Now let me minimize those windows so it's not so busy behind here. And let me look at Optimize. So Optimize, again, is a tool that allows you to see, actually let me go back to the home and Optimize. This is what you see right when you log in. This lets you see and report on information per process definition. So the focus is reporting on specific process definition information. This is that same process definition that by now you might be somewhat tired of. Sorry, you only have 20 more minutes of this process model. But if I click on a different view, it's going to overlay some very important reporting information on top of that process model. So here we have a heat map that will show you the number of instances of each individual step. Right? So this will show you that notified dealer has been executed twice. This particular step has only been executed once because we've only followed this path one time. And the color coding will show you which ones have been executed relatively more often. This is particularly useful as you have very large diagrams and you want to see which paths have been used most often. In some cases, you could have thousands of instances and you could have certain branches that either weren't used at all or were used very lightly, and perhaps those can be removed to create more efficient versions of those diagrams in the future. Another view that we have is the duration view. So here, instead of the number of times each step has been executed, we're going to tell you the mean execution time, or the average execution time for each step. So this is taken on average 5.44 seconds. This one has taken on average 34 milliseconds, and this one has taken by far the longest, which is why it's red, at 23.34 seconds, right? So you can see at a glance which steps are taking the longest. Now this particular step calls a subprocess that has 2 user tasks, so it makes sense, and obviously once you know that, you can see why it's taking more time. That may not always be the case. You might have a step that's not supposed to be taking that long, that is, and this gives you the ability to figure that out and make the necessary changes. Let's show you one more thing here within Optimize, probably, in my opinion, the most powerful feature, and that is that you have the ability to set a target value for each one of these steps. Right? These that are highlighted in blue don't have target value set. The ones that have heat maps overlaid on the steps do have target value set. So here my target value is 3 seconds. My actual average is 5.44 seconds, which you may recall from the duration view, and that's 81% above my target of 3 seconds. Here, my target was 20 seconds, and I'm slightly over that, so it's green. It's not a lot over that, therefore it's not going to be red. And it's relative, like all of the other heat maps. So that's Optimize. Now Optimize, we're doing a lot of work on Optimize to give you additional capabilities here because there's a bunch of information that is stored and then stored within Camunda BPM, and then of course shared with Optimize. So expect some significant advancements here in the future. Let me show you a couple of these steps just to show you what you would see from a developer's perspective within this process model. This step, again, is using JPA, therefore it is using Java behind the scenes. And we have an expression that is making use of a bean. Actually, it would, in this case, be a CDI bean. For those of you that makes sense for, that may be a very important thing. For those of you that doesn't make sense for, don't worry about it. The idea is this makes developers' lives easier within Java Enterprise Edition environments, which is where this is running. Camunda does not have to run on a Java Enterprise Edition application server. It can run on a Java Standard Edition application server. You can get the same functionality through the use of Spring in a Java Standard Edition environment. So we have this bean. That gives us the ability to then leverage a Java class and leverage all of the power of a Java class. Again, for those of you that use Java, this is going to be particularly interesting to you. If you're interested in more information here, let us know. I'd be happy to talk about that in more depth. So that's an example of what we call a service task to execute Java code. Here is an example of a decision task. The implementation is DMN. We have our decision ref. Of course, I had already showed you that this links to a decision table within Camunda. Let me show you one more item, and that is this one. This is a connector. So we have built-in capability without having to write code to call web service endpoints. And this is a REST API endpoint. You put the information that you would expect in here. This is a hard-coded URL. It doesn't have to be hard-coded. It can be based on a variable. All of these things, that is true for all of these things. Of course, you see that we can put headers in here, and we can even put tokens in the header for a call if that's your chosen security method. And then, of course, we have the ability to parse the output. And I'm using something called Camunda Spin in this particular case, but you can parse the output in whatever way you choose. So, high-level overview of what we have within the product. As noted earlier, if I've gone over any of this with too much speed, you can certainly ask questions, or you can contact us separately, and we'd be happy to show you a demonstration of the product. Let's get back to our PowerPoint presentation. I don't have a whole lot that's left. I do want to talk about flexibility within the product. So Camunda has as one of its missions to make life easier for developers. It is our opinion that it is the rare workflow or decision application that can be built and deployed to production without the involvement of a developer. Developers are going to have to be involved most of the time. So we make our product very easy to use for those developers, right? And I've got oceanfront property in Arizona listed there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. There are companies that will sell you this zero-code lie, but the reality is it is as rare as that aforementioned oceanfront property in Arizona. So does that mean you have to write Java? No. You can write Java within Camunda. And if you are a Java EE developer, or if you're a Java Standard Edition Spring developer, we support all of those components that you would like to use in order to make your lives easier. We do support the Java EE app servers, Wildfly and JBoss, along with WebSphere and WebLogic as well. We support common Java utilities such as Maven, Ant. You can use Enterprise Java Beans, Java Persistence API, context and dependency injection. Yes, you can use Spring. You can use Spring JMS. I'm throwing out a whole bunch of acronyms here. For some of you, it makes a difference. For others, you're like, what is that? And if you're thinking, what is that? Maybe you prefer not to use Java. And in Camunda, you don't have to. We build our application such that you can use connectors to connect to web services. You can use what we call external tasks. So external tasks sort of flip the script when it comes to the execution of code. When Camunda gets to an external task, it puts a unit of work on a queue, and an external system can call in using a REST API to Camunda, get that list of work, complete that work, and then provide the results to Camunda. So that allows you to let Camunda control the execution of the processor workflow instances while allowing other applications to actually execute the business logic. And in addition to that, you can use script tasks, and within those script tasks, you have the ability to use Python. You can use JavaScript, so all of your JavaScript developers can write your code. You don't have to use Java. This is real. We have several customers that are using this. I have a customer in Southern California in the defense space where they have teams that use JavaScript and teams that use Java, and they coexist nicely within the Camunda ecosystem. So flexible, easy to use, and you can build applications your way within our platform. Now I'd like to turn it over to Daya to see if there are any questions that you might have and that we can answer.
Great, thanks so much, Ryan. Yeah, so I'm just going to take a quick look at the questions pane, and there are a couple questions that have come in. The first one is, do you have any tutorials online or perhaps other resources that I can use for further study?
There's a host of information online that you can use, and if you were to search using your preferred search engine, whatever that might be, you'll find a bunch of stuff online. Our official tutorials are available at docs.camunda.org, which is where our product documentation is, and there's a link that says Get Started near the top left, and that's always the right place to start if you're just getting your feet wet with the Camunda platform. But I'd encourage you, once you have completed those tutorials, to go out there and look at what some other people are using Camunda for. And that not only gets you the additional experience, but it gives you some of that real-world knowledge of what Camunda is doing within businesses and for businesses, for our customers worldwide.
Great, thanks so much. And the next question that just came in is, who are your competitors in this space?
We have a host of different competitors, and I would organize those in two different categories. So we have a host of open source competitors. Probably our biggest competitors are JBPM and Activity, although we have other companies that are really getting into the space. DorisWare is getting into the space with the Flowable team and others. So those are our open source competitors. And then we have competitors that will be more in the commercial workflow and decisioning space, the Pegasystems, the Appians, the IBMs. The difference between us and the Pegas, the Appians, the IBMs is that our platform is going to be significantly more flexible from a UI standpoint as well as from a configuration standpoint. You want to change the way the Camunda engine works. We'll give you a lot of hook points to be able to do that and to be able to do that quite easily. On the other side, in terms of how we differentiate versus our open source competition, they tend to be more focused in other areas. I would say, for example, that the JBPM team from Red Hat's a great product, but they have typically been focused more on decisioning and less on workflow and less on how those two integrate. It's my perspective. I think that overall we have the most flexible platform. Certainly happy to talk about all of that in more detail with you. And if you're interested in that, then I would encourage you to use this contact us information and I should have flipped to the screen a couple of minutes ago. Sorry, Daya. But you can use this contact information, reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk to you in more depth about any of those items.
Great, thanks, Ryan, and yeah, thank you for putting up that contact us information. Another question, or more of a comment, I guess, and I think it makes sense with the contact us information. Can we set up a demo for our company? So I guess the best approach is just to send us a quick email. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the answer is yes, of course. Send us an email, and I will, Daya and I will make sure you get in contact with the right folks. If you are in North America, it'll be me and my colleague Frederick in San Francisco, and we'll make sure we arrange that for you.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So the next question we have is, the person's wondering, they see that we have a community edition and an enterprise edition of Camunda, which you talked about, and they're just wondering what the differences are.
So there are several differences. There are product differences to start with. The Camunda Cockpit product is different between the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition, and the differences are compelling. In terms of history, you can see a lot of history information within Cockpit that you can't see within the Enterprise Edition of Cockpit, that you can't see within the Community Edition of Cockpit. In addition to that, we have the Optimize product, which is not available with the Community Edition and is available with the Enterprise Edition of Camunda BPM. But in addition to product differences, if you are an Enterprise Edition customer, you can make use of our consulting services. You can make use of our support, obviously. And you can also make use of our training. And those are enablers that will more than pay for your investment, will more than provide a return on your investment in Camunda Enterprise Edition. And as with anything else, if that has piqued your interest, certainly let us know, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that in more detail.
Great. So I'll just keep asking some questions just because we have time. The next question is, we process a very large number of workflow transactions in our environment, and we've seen some performance testing numbers online and they look good. Do you support database clusters?
We do. We absolutely do. So if you are going to use a database cluster, the cluster has to support the read committed isolation level. And the translation to that is, if you commit to a node within the cluster, a read that happens a millisecond later from another node in the cluster has to get that same data. In other words, the data integrity has to be preserved at all times across those cluster nodes. But if you have that, then yes, we do support database clusters. So you can use, for example, Oracle RAC, you can use the Galera cluster, you can use other clusters as well, as long as they support that isolation level. In terms of performance, yes, we're very confident that our platform is the highest performance workflow and decision platform that exists in the market today. There are some third-party studies that you can find from CASE. There's a CASE benchmarking study that will show you exactly that in a comparison that was performed against some of our competitors in the open source space. So yeah, we're very confident in our performance, and certainly you can use it with database clusters.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And yeah, so I see one final question, and it kind of piggybacks off the competitor question to a certain extent. And it says, we're evaluating various BPM engines, but are having difficulty finding one that can also help us with service orchestration. Does Camunda have that capability?
Yes, in fact, we do have a customer in North America that is using us exclusively for service orchestration. So essentially they're using Camunda as their ESB, Enterprise Services Bus. And the reason that's possible is by default with Camunda, if you set up a workflow model or a process model and you don't have any wait states in that model, so you don't have any user tasks, you don't have any steps like external tasks that have to wait for external input, then it will run those process instances straight through. And you have the ability, when you execute those process instances through, say, the REST API or the Java API, to ask it to return all of the variables that are generated within an instance. Given that, you can use it exactly like people used to use the old Beeple stuff for business process execution, really services orchestration. So yes, you can use it for services orchestration. And the wonderful thing is you can use it for both. So you can have process models that are set up as workflows with asynchronous steps and user tasks, and we're very efficient for that. And you can have other process models in the exact same engine that are designed to be service orchestration models. We have customers that do that, and they do that very successfully.
Perfect. So yeah, those are all the questions that were in our question feed. So I want to go ahead and say thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for your questions. And like Ryan mentioned, if you do want to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to hear from you. Just please feel free to send us an email at info@camunda.com. And that's everything from my side. I'll quickly pass it on to Ryan to also say his final goodbye.
Thank you guys for joining us today, and Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays to you. I hope you have a wonderful season.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.